My name's Lynn Gately. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at Kimball Library, and we are co-sponsoring this event today with Chandler Center for the Arts and Karango Books, the author reception. And we have our author, Shirley Hook, who's written a memoir called My Bring Up, and her daughter, AmyHook-Therrien, who's done the illustrations.
And I'm really honored to be here with you today to celebrate the publishing of My Bring Up. Shirley, tell us a little bit about how this book came about.
Well, Jack Rowell, he started calling me at dinner time every night for a week and said that his friend was having classes, writing classes, and he wanted me to take the classes. So after about the 7th day of him calling and telling me how many slots she had open, I finally said, okay, Jack, I'll go down tomorrow. And that was when I first met Sarah. And as far as the book, she was very, she's very good with her students, and she kept on pushing them and saying, okay, you can do it, you can do it. After about 2 years of me hemming and hawing, she said, we're going to do it. So that's how I got the book published.
Oh, it's a fantastic project. But what is really marvelous, too, is some of the illustrations done by Amy. Amy, tell us how you worked. What inspired you to do the illustrations?
So a lot of times me and Mom collaborated on each of the illustrations. I would read through each story a couple of times just to come up with some ideas, and then I would go through them with Mom. For one of them, for her $5 bicycle, I looked up a bunch of bicycles from that era, and then I asked Mom which was similar to hers, and then I tried to pick her brain a little bit and find out, just little details that she remembers, and, tried to really put those into the illustration. For one of them, she always used to talk about her childhood home, and there aren't very many pictures of it. So she actually we found one that was a very small portion of it, and we had to piece together everything else. So she had to remember every little detail of that house so that I could depict it. And it was almost as if I was learning more about my family history, just from these little minute details that she would, remember the tin coming off of curling and coming off of the building, just little things like that. And then other illustrations she didn't know what I was going to draw, and I would just show them to her. And it was just a really fun project to work on, and I definitely learned quite a bit more about my family history and everything, so it was really cool.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because it's not often that folks share an oral history. How did you determine what stories to put in this publication?
Well, I told my girls some of the stories when they were little, and they would sit there and crack up. So I figured if the kids would crack up, hopefully the parents would crack up with it. But no, it's. I think it was important to do these stories because, like you said, the oral history, they don't do that much anymore like they did years and years ago. And it's important to write these stories down because if they're not, they will eventually disappear. And it would be sad for the next generation if they wanted to know what happened or how people lived in certain eras. And like ours was 50s and 60s. And like, not everybody was poor, but the hill people were poor. And I didn't know that we were poor until I went to school. I think it's 3rd grade I finally figured it out. And I didn't even know what bought bread was because my mother always baked. I didn't even know what sugar was because we always sugared. And so there's a lot of things I didn't know, but we lived off the land. And that's what we're doing. We're still doing that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Tell our viewers where this story takes place.
It takes place in a little village called Chelsea, Vermont. And that's in central Vermont, not too far from here, way up in West Hill. And we actually lived in a shack, more or less. It was a tin building. They called it a trailer, but it had wheels on it, so I guess you could call it a trailer. My parents had a bedroom at one end, and then it was everything else was open. We had bunk beds for the kids and, well, for us kids. And the water just was a hose through the wall. And it ran constantly. We didn't have a refrigerator or a bathroom. And it was, we were brought up that way. We always had clean clothes though, and my mother kept us, clean. So that was cool.
Did you ever think growing up that you would be a writer?
Not exactly. I don't count my chickens before they hatch, as they say. I keep on saying that, but I don't. No, it's been fun. It's been really fun. And I got 3 or 4 more books I want to do.
Wow.
So,
can you share a little bit about some of the topics that you'll be writing on in the future?
well, actually, one of them is about a bat. And I actually lived in the attic after we moved into my grandmother's house. And I had my own stairways, which was cool. And I used to feel something go past my face after dark, and I didn't know what it was. And come to find out, it was a little tiny bat. And it lived on the ceiling just above my head. It probably wasn't very sanitary, but I had company, that's for sure. So I used to Amy told, when she was little, the bat had high-top shoes, Converse shoes, sneakers, and he had a cape. So when I wrote this story, I just put the bat in there, but I didn't put that he had high-top sneakers and stuff. She told me I had to put the high-top sneakers in. She said, no, that ain't the way it goes.
Well, now we're finding out, Amy, that you actually contributed to, suggesting, stories. Can you share with our viewers what one of your favorite stories might be?
I really love the one about their family cow chewing up the T-shirts. And it's just so funny because as little kids, they would get into trouble, but I think it was more fun finding out how they tried to get out of trouble that made it even more funny. So they yarned the T-shirts out of the cow's mouth and put it up on the clothesline and then let the cow out so it looked like the cow just got out and it ate it off the clothesline when they were actually doing something else that they weren't supposed to be doing. And yeah, it's just so funny how that whole story came about. I love it, and the way she does her details and everything, it's just so funny. I love that.
Corongo Writers Studio started at the Randolph Senior Center, and it started as a workshop for seniors so that they could write down their life stories or parts of their life story. And we then moved to a little art gallery on Merchants Row in Randolph, and that's where I met Shirley. She was a friend of a friend, and she had heard that we were helping people write their stories, and she came to a writing workshop, and she just kept coming back. She had so much to write about and so much to say. And she was in a writing workshop with my mother, and the two of them used to cut up all the time. They really misbehaved. They were really terrible students. They didn't do their homework, and they really tried to get the better of me. But I prevailed. And so Shirley today has this wonderful collection of stories, 20 of which she's published in this book. Now, Corongo is a writer's studio. We're not a publishing company. What we do is we help writers publish their own work. It is very rare that we will publish another writer's work for them. It's their book. They keep the proceeds. They manage the sales, and everything is theirs. It's their decision. And we help them in any way we can. Editing, giving them advice about how to sell their books or how to talk about their books or what to do with their books. But we make sure that if they want a book at the end of this writing process, they have a book. And that's how this happened.
All right, and you were just listening to Sarah Tucker, who is also a writer herself. Sarah, could you share with our viewers a little bit about some of your personal work as well?
Well, I have a background in publishing. It's mainly magazine publishing. I worked for a bunch of publishing companies in New York. And then I moved back to Randolph, which is where I grew up. And I was kind of casting about for something to do. And so that's how the writing, helping other writers tell their stories began. but I myself am a writer, and I used to write. Primarily a journalist, so I used to write. I did a lot of travel writing and writing about the arts, and it was always somehow involved with journalism. Then I got into memoir writing, life writing, and I wanted to write my own story, and it sort of stemmed from that. I published a couple of books of my own, and then I realized that there were writers all around me who wanted to do something similar but didn't know how. And so I had these 2 books, and I was able to say, I did it, and you can do it too. The 2 books were nonfiction. One is called Our House in Arusha, and it is set in Tanzania. And the other is An Eruption of Owls, and it's set in Vermont. And it's basically parts of my own family story.
Beautiful. Sounds exciting. And I'm sure maybe we can find them here at the Kimball Public Library.
I bet you can.
Shirley, you've been taught by Sarah a little bit, encouraged to write. Will she continue to be your mentor as you move along with your projects?
Well, of course. She still wants me to.
I want you. She's my star pupil, one of them. They're all stars.
They are fun. They're fun.
But
Yeah.
Shirley's definitely a leader.
It sounds like having a support group really does encourage you to practice this skill. And would you say that it takes a lot of practice?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Just
Writing and editing and writing some more and
It takes sticking with it.
Right.
It's very easy to get even quite far along in your writing and then put it aside one day and not go back to it. And that is one thing that a group helps with, because you've got your group meeting coming up and you want to take something, and that's motivation. So it keeps you working, definitely. Would you say?
yeah, and once in a while.
Even though she didn't do her homework always, but
Yeah, but I couldn't do those 7 steps. I had to.
she has her own way of doing things.
yeah.
No, the classes are excellent, and like you said, they support each other, and it's really good. And the ladies were so cool. Hopefully they come today.
There's a lot of positive feedback because there's genuine interest in each other's stories. It's real. So when you write something and you just keep it in your own notebook and don't show it to anybody, you begin to doubt that this is a worthwhile thing to do. And if you start to wonder if anyone would ever be interested and why am I doing this, you would question yourself. When you have a group and you're all in the same boat, you're all writing, you're all sharing, and you're really just looking for encouragement, it's genuine interest, but it's also kind of a team spirit, I guess. Would you say?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is, because otherwise it's you're your worst enemy when it comes to writing. 'Cause you always think you were the worst one, and it isn't going to be published, so why bother? Yeah.
But when you share it with people you know
And
on
when
a
they laugh,
weekly or
whatever,
monthly basis, that right there is motivation. You get a reward for that.
Yeah.
It's its own reward.
So it's fun. It's well worth it. When you coming back for a while?
Oh, don't ask me that. I don't know. My life is complicated.
I want to thank you both for allowing Moccasin Tracks to record this pre-interview of the presentation. And in closing, is there anything else you'd like our viewers to know about you all?
No?
I'd like them to know that Shirley, this is just the beginning, that she is working on a cookbook, and she has other stories up her sleeve, some are written down, some not. But one of the reasons that I was so excited about my bring up is that I knew that it was the first of more books to come. So see, I've got you on the hook now.
Okay.
Oleone, see you at the presentation.
Thank you.
You can take a seat, please. We're glad to see you all here today. I'm Lynn Gately, the Adult Services Librarian at Kimball Library, a few doors down. And we were delighted when Sarah Tucker asked us if we would host this author reception today. We have partners, Chandler, for supplying this wonderful room and setting it all up for us. And of course, Coronado Books, which is the writing studio that Sarah Tucker and her husband, Patrick Texier, lead. Sarah has been a great friend to the library for years now, as was her mother, Idora. And she has been, over the years, doing several writing workshops. She donates her time and her talents and her encouragement to her students. And as a result, we have some writers here to tell us about their experience. Thanks for coming.
A few years ago, I was coming back to the U.S. from France, and as I re-entered the country, a man in a uniform asked to see my passport. And then he said, "What have you been doing in France?" And I said, "Writing," which was more or less true. And he said, "What have you been writing?" And I said, "A bestseller." Okay, go. I spent, the truth is I really didn't know what I was writing. I felt like I was just writing a big mess. And I was thinking about checking it out. But I was not going to tell this guy that. So it seems like I spend a lot of my time trying to figure out how to help writers write. And a big part of me wants to say, I really don't have any special ability here. It's a lot about just dogged persistence. But people come to me for advice, and I want to try to help them. So I was really glad when I discovered lately, I read this sentence that I thought distilled a lot of wisdom into 9 words. And it goes, "Every story worth telling is about transformation through trials." The hero is faced with a set of challenges that he has to deal with and is forced to change. And I read that and I thought, well, that's really profound. But is it true? And so I tested it on the writing that was coming out of some of our workshops, where people are often writing personal histories. Stories like How I Learned to Drive by Deanne Calhoun Fago, which is really about growing up in the South during the Depression, a lonely child, a misfit, who escapes, goes to New York and becomes an artist. Teaching by Idora Tucker. My mother's first year of teaching was so difficult that she swore she would never go back. That's not what happened. And My Annie by Barbara Campbell, about raising a child with Down syndrome, born in 1960, when the advice was sent her to Brandon, which was an institutional home run by the state. And instead she brought her home. And that's the story of how she raised her child before there was any public education for students like Annie. So these are personal histories. Personal histories are all about becoming the person you are today. And the getting of an education is a common theme, one type of education or another. The narrator of my bring-up, Shirley Hook, is a survivor. She survives being cold, being poor, being picked on. She survives being bored. And do you remember how painful it was when you were a child to be bored? It was like you could die from boredom. She survived that. She grew up on West Hill in Chelsea, and she lived in a tiny house with all her siblings. I think there were 5? 4? And they didn't have a lot of toys. She spent a lot of time outdoors. And I would say largely unsupervised time from the way her stories tend to go. Many of them begin with her and her siblings looking for something interesting to do. Her dad had a junkyard, and they made toys out of the junk. They befriended wild animals. They visited the neighbors up and down the road, young and old. When the road crew came through in the spring, they would would meet the guys and sit there and while they ate their lunch and talk with them. These are kids, right? A recurring character in Shirley's stories is Moochie, the cow, the milk cow. On chilly mornings, the kids used to, when they were sent outdoors, they would take turns lying on top of Moochie to get warm. So Shirley's book is oral history. Many of these stories begin as stories that are told to children, grandchildren, feel good, uplifting, stories that are told within families over and over again. And they are rich in subtext. Embedded in them are lessons in all kinds of things. And they're often told by women, in particular, mothers, grandmothers, and not surprisingly, many of the students in our writing workshops are women, and this is the kind of thing they're writing. These lessons are invaluable, these stories are invaluable. So I was delighted when Shirley showed up in one of my workshops. I didn't know her, that was how we were introduced. Sociologists tell us that families that tell stories, the children who grow up in those families tend to be more successful in life. They have more self-confidence, a greater sense of who they are. And so Shirley's book is illustrated by her daughter, AmyHook-Therrien, who went to the University of Maine and graduated with an MFA. And is that right? BFA. Okay. BFA. So here she is, and I want to welcome AmyHook-Therrien and her mother, Shirley Hook. Ladies.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming today. I'd like to thank Kimball Library for hosting this event, Chandler Center of the Arts, and Corango Books for co-sponsoring.
Can you move the sound closer, please?
I want to thank Sarah for her fantastic writing classes and believing in each and every one of her students. And Amy, you're a wonderful artist. Thank you for doing the illustrations for my book, and I hope you'll be able to do my next one. And I want to thank my family, Jenny, Grayson, Jose, and all the other kids. It's been really great. They've been very supportive, and I thank you. A number of years ago, my youngest daughter asked what we did when we were younger, and I told her a few stories, and she replied, "But Mom, we don't have those type of memories." I told her that it was the era, the 50s and 60s. A lot of the people were really poor, and they had to have the imagination to go along with it. I was rather taken back because both my daughters had done a lot more than I had ever done at their ages. They have traveled the world and have done many adventures. So this is where my story begins. I love to do genealogy, and I'm not an expert or anything, but what I do know is that the stories are not written down. They will at some point be gone forever, and the future generations will know little of what occurs during their parents' or grandparents' generation. So I think everybody should sit down sometime and try writing some of the stories that you remember when you were a child. And now I'll try to read one of my stories here. Called a T-shirt. In our early childhood, our mother would send us out to play. It was early in the morning, right after Dad left for work. It would be really cold sometimes, unbearable. We would head for our playhouse, which was an old car without the wheels. Inside the old car, the walls were velvet. There were velvet shades that actually still worked. There was an old chair without the back. It was leather and it had brass tacks, and it was pretty good looking way back when it was new. We would sit on the broken rocking chair with a red leather seat, and it was a lovely, lovely seat. There we would sit and wait for the sun to bring the warmth back into our being. Soon it would get too hot inside. We would venture out and find something to do. We played cowboys and rode the cows as our favorite steeds. We were told not to put our cowgirl outfits on, but kids being kids, we thought, why not? I wanted to be Annie Oakley, my hero of heroes. Actually, I wanted to grow up just like she was. My sister and I stripped down and placed our clothing carefully on the barbed wire fence in a place where the big people wouldn't notice. And off we went. We played all day, and finally it was time to help the supper. We wandered over to the fence where our clothes were stashed. About half of them were gone, vanished into thin air. Old Moochie was standing there, chewing her cud like she didn't have a care in the world. She wanted her ears scratched, and we obliged. All at once, our eyes almost popped out of our heads. Moochie wasn't just chewing grass, it appeared, but there were stripes in her mouth. Have you ever tried to get something out of a cow's mouth? It ain't easy. We tried to get it to drop it, like our old dog, but that didn't work. She just eyed us and continued to chew. We had to do something fast, for Mother would skin us alive. We finally came up with a plan. My sister was to pry the mouth open, and I was a lucky one. I had to stick my hand in the cow's mouth and pull out the shirts. Easier said than done. The problem was she kept on swallowing them, so we had to wait through the cycle. God knows how many cycles we went through. Finally, a window of opportunity. It was now or never. I didn't dare to blink, fearing I'd miss once again. I grabbed the edge and pulled with all my might, landing in a heap at Moochie's feet. Finally, victory. We hooted and hollered and then dragged. The shirts were the color of grass. They had teeth holes in every inch of the material. We were totally dead. There must be a way to get out of this predicament. Sure enough, a light bulb went on in our head. We circled around the trailer to make sure no one was outside to spoil our plan. We creeped up this clothesline and pulled two clean t-shirts off. We pulled the shirts quickly over our heads. There in turn, we hung the holy green grass-stained shirts on the line with the clean clothes. To make it really believable, we let the cows out. They milled around the clothesline, batting the clothes with their tail and chewing on some sure as rain they were going to believe it. My parents never mentioned it, never. Anything about the holy shirts or the cows being out. We did sweat bullets for a couple days, and then we figured we were home free.
That's my favorite story. Hi everyone, I'm AmyHook-Therrien, Shirley Hook's daughter, and illustrator of my bring up. When Mom first asked me to illustrate her book, I was honored. Ever since I was a child, I had asked her to tell me stories of her childhood. She has always been a natural storyteller, bringing everyone listening into bouts of laughter. She has always been able to make people laugh. The artwork depicted in the book were a collaboration between Mom and I, wherein she gave me ideas, but ultimately she left the decision of what to illustrate up to me. It was another way for me to learn about my family's history. Mom always talked about her childhood home, but I had never really seen it. There are very few photos of it. When I created the illustration of her home, she had to describe it to me, remembering the smallest details, the way the tin siding lifted and curled slightly around the edges. Some of the other illustrations were a surprise for her. I got to choose what I wanted to draw. The broken branch, showing the branch falling off our family tree, referencing the eugenics program that cut many Abenaki bloodlines short. I would read each story a few times to decide what to depict. It was such a wonderful project to work on. Mom, I am so incredibly proud of you for this huge accomplishment. I can't wait to read your next book. I love you.